In the sprawling terrain of the Donetsk Oblast, the city of Pokrovsk stood as a critical prize. A vital railway and logistics hub, its capture was the cornerstone of Moscow's summer 2025 offensive. But what began as a major push would unravel into a tactical nightmare. By late September, the offensive hadn't just stalled, it had reversed. A lethal trap, sprung with devastating precision, has slammed shut on thousands of Russian soldiers. The campaign began in early summer with massed artillery and armored columns. For weeks, they made costly gains across a patchwork of open fields and small villages that offered little cover. By August, the offensive's momentum was waning, blunted by a Ukrainian defense that refused to break. Instead, it bent, adapted, and prepared to strike back, turning the terrain to its advantage. This wasn't a simple stalemate. Moscow's summer offensive reversed into a catastrophic failure. By late September 2025, the picture had become stark and unambiguous. The very forces that had been spearheading the assault were now fighting for their own survival, caught in a web of Ukrainian design. The architect of this reversal was an evolution in Ukrainian doctrine, a fluid, maneuver-based defense synchronized with pervasive drone overwatch. Instead of holding every inch of ground, commanders embraced elasticity, identifying key Russian axes of advance and preparing kill zones along their flanks. This approach was built on superior situational awareness, fed by a constant stream of data from reconnaissance drones, allowing them to anticipate enemy movements with unnerving accuracy. The result was not one large encirclement, but a series of smaller, interconnected traps that methodically dismembered the Russian advance. While Pokrovsk itself still stands firmly under Ukrainian control, the battle was won in the surrounding fields. The tactic was brutally effective. Ukrainian forces would yield ground at chosen points, luring overextended Russian units deeper into a salient. Once the Russian spearheads were committed and their supply lines stretched thin, the trap would spring. Fast, mobile units counterattacked with speed and precision, not at the head of the advance, but at its vulnerable shoulders, the narrow corridors connecting forward elements to their rear. These strikes severed the salients, transforming local fights into desperate sieges where attackers became the besieged and defenders became the hunters. On September 25th, the situation crystallized. Reports confirmed multiple Russian units near Pokrovsk were trapped in developing cauldrons, cut off from their main force. The Dobropilya sector became the crucible where these pockets were forged. Here, ground teams severed the salients at their narrowest points, closing the door behind overextended units. Above, a layered network of drones created a suffocating overwatch. Reconnaissance drones provided constant targeting data, while swarms of FPV drones acted as precision-guided munitions, punishing any movement. Every attempt to break out, every effort to send in relief columns, was met with lethal force. Escape routes and resupply lanes became kill zones under the constant eyes in the sky. Russia had massed over 100,000 troops for Pokrovsk, banking on sheer numbers. But Ukraine refused to fight a war of attrition. Instead, they answered with agility and information dominance, shifting the sector's balance from brute force assaults to precision encirclements. The trap was not just physical, it was cognitive, sprung from a deeper understanding of the modern battlefield, leaving thousands of soldiers isolated, surrounded, and facing a grim reality. Pokrovsk in Donetsk is a critical logistics hub where roads and rails shape the very fabric of the battle. For Russia, capturing it was a primary strategic objective. Seizing this nexus would sever the main artery feeding Ukrainian defenses across the entire Donetsk front, starving them of reinforcements, ammunition, and fuel. It was the key to unlocking the rest of the region. For Ukraine, holding it was non-negotiable. Losing it would precipitate a catastrophic collapse of their defensive line. The push towards Pokrovsk began with a multi-pronged assault on the Dobropilya sector, a landscape of open countryside and small settlements. Russian forces advanced from the north and east, attempting to form a pincer to cut off the town and its defenders. This massive concentration of force, over 110,000 troops supported by thousands of armored vehicles and artillery pieces, was designed for a decisive breakthrough. Moscow's operational doctrine was clear: massed assault. They relied on a textbook attrition warfare strategy, using relentless rolling artillery barrages to pulverize defensive positions, followed by large-scale mechanized and infantry assaults. The goal was to overwhelm defenders through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. accepting staggering losses as a necessary cost to grind forward, meter by meter. This approach was intended to stretch Ukrainian lines to their breaking point. Facing this onslaught, Ukraine couldn't match Russia shell for shell or soldier for soldier. Instead, they implemented a strategy of maneuver defense. In mid-August, the arrival of experienced Ukrainian units, including the Azov Corps, was pivotal. They weren't just there to plug gaps. They were there to change the fundamental dynamics of the battle, imposing tactical discipline and a mastery of decentralized intelligence-led operations. The core of their strategy revolved around a concept known as the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. The side that can cycle through this process faster gains a decisive advantage. While the Russian command structure was often rigid and slow to react, Ukrainian units leveraged real-time intelligence from a vast network of drones and sensors to get inside Russia's decision cycle. The Russian advance, powerful as it was, created its own vulnerabilities. As their salient deepened, their flanks became dangerously long and their supply lines stretched thin. This was the weakness Ukraine was waiting for. They answered with maneuver. Small, fast strikes where the line was thinnest. Highly mobile teams began launching rapid, targeted strikes against command posts, fuel depots, and artillery positions deep behind the front lines. The monolithic Russian advance began to lose cohesion. The front line fractured into isolated cauldrons. No easy exits. Defenders set ambushes and pre-sighted routes under constant drone-directed fire, turning supply corridors into death traps. This was the ultimate clash of military philosophies. Maneuver warfare and information dominance outpaced brute force. In places like Pankivka, the outcomes showed which approach prevailed. The countryside around Dobropilya became a proving ground where tactics and drones dictated movement. Here, numbers mattered less than seeing first, deciding faster, and striking precisely. Pankivka, once a staging point toward Pokrovsk, became a case study. By mid-September, the tide turned. Ukraine's Azov elements cleared the settlement with deliberate small unit action. Russia tried to counterattack, thin infantry detachments and a marine regiment. Ukraine struck preemptively, hitting units in transit before they could mass. One 10-man group was intercepted by drones. 9 killed, 1 surrendered. Motorcycle troops meant to evade drones never reached the village. They were intercepted and destroyed in the open, the lethal gray zone at work. A supply van carrying munitions and weapons was hit and erupted into a fireball. Every approach into the pockets was pre-sighted by artillery and mortars. Ground units formed the physical cordon. Ground maneuver, drone overwatch, and precision fire created a dynamic, multi-layered trap. Pankivka distilled the wider fight. Ukrainian initiative, Russian disarray, drones deciding contact. Relief never arrived, the village held, and the cauldron tightened. Ukraine enforced isolation with relentless drone warfare. Drones saw everything. Reconnaissance and interdiction rolled into one. In the pockets, movement itself became the fatal vulnerability. For weeks, trapped units were cut off from all support. Ammunition, food, and medical supplies dwindled to nothing. Surrounded under constant aerial threat, fear and paralysis set in. Azov's chief of staff pointed to 3 cauldrons. Sit for a month, then die, surrender, or withdraw. Withdrawal was largely illusory. Gray zones watched every path. For most, the realistic choices were surrender, or an inevitable death. Drones were the eyes that never closed, and the sword that struck with precision. There was no rest, no sanctuary. The pockets became high-tech prisons with a death sentence over every inmate. Russia pushed an advance it could not logistically sustain. Once Ukraine cut the lines, men in the pockets were effectively abandoned. Capturing Pokrovsk dissolved into a primal struggle for survival. During a visit to Dobropilya, President Zelensky detailed the results. Roughly 160 square kilometers were liberated, about 62 square miles. But this number only tells part of the story. A further 170 square kilometers were designated as cleared. The distinction is crucial. Liberated territory is secured for civilian administration. Cleared territory is a precarious gray zone. The enemy is expelled, but the area remains dangerous and contested, representing the fluid edge of the advance. The cost to the aggressor was staggering. In the Pokrovsk area alone, Russia suffered around 2,500 casualties. Of those, about 1,300 were killed in action, devastating losses for a single axis. These figures primarily reflect frontline fighting and may not include the full toll on the units trapped inside the cauldrons. whose fates were still being determined. In response, the Russian command committed its reserves, including units designated as elite. Reports pointed to the arrival of the 40th and 155th Marine Brigades, alongside airborne elements. On paper, these are formidable forces. The 155th Naval Infantry, for instance, has a history in the war's most intense hotspots. But the elite designation has become a shadow of its former self. After years of hard fighting, many so-called elite units are severely degraded. The 155th itself was famously reconstituted multiple times after catastrophic losses in earlier campaigns like Vuhledar. This degradation means a hollowing out of capability, a shortage of experienced NCOs, the backbone of any army, a shortage of training for new replacements, and a shortage of modern, reliable equipment. So when these reinforcements were committed, they were not the fresh, powerful force their name implied. They were fed into the same meat grinder. But without countering Ukraine's pervasive drones and precision fires, their columns were vulnerable the moment they moved. Assembly areas were targeted and supply lines were interdicted before they could make an impact. This failure highlights a fundamental clash of doctrines. Numbers drove a 20th century model that treats mass as decisive. But Pokrovsk showed that controlling the information space reshapes the fight. A reported 10-to-1 superiority meant little when movement and resupply were exposed from above, tracked in real time, and targeted with lethal accuracy before that mass could even be brought to bear. The new paradigm is defined by a simple mantra: see farther, decide faster, strike precisely. It's a loop that prioritizes information and speed over raw mass. The Dobropilya cauldrons are a tactical victory and a warning to outdated doctrine. In this war, adaptability and integration of new technology outweigh mass. Pokrovsk proved it.